So the roster breakdown is returning players, tenders, draft picks, free agents, and affiliates. Well, the returners are pretty easy. That's not really much that needs to be discussed on that. It's players that played for the team before. We did a whole video, real quick video on the tender process. Now we're going to deal with the draft picks. Coming into main camp, you've got players from all over the place. There's players from that are tenders, that are draft picks, that are returning players, that are affiliates, free agents, and other invited guests to the camp. The camps can be 100, 150, 200 players. The idea is to get to that final roster of 35. You want to leave main camp on that roster. Going into the preseason, that roster gets trimmed, and of course during the season, that roster gets trimmed again. So we're going to look at that roster and the components and how many players actually make it and where they come from. So a draft. The NHL draft is usually held in June. Draft order is set by the prior year regular season in inverse order. You finish first in the league, you go last in the draft. That can only change if you trade up or trade down, just like you watch in the NFL, NHL, or into the basketball, how they can actually move their draft picks by trading. You can do the same thing in the NAHL. The draft is usually 14 to 17 rounds. We'll explain why that number changes. It really doesn't change why it's usually falls in that range. It's held virtually, once again, inverse order of the final standings, and new franchises go first. So if there's a new franchise, they get to pick prior to the last place team. So that maximum summer protected number of 35 is important. So that number even starts before the draft. A team has 35 slots. Now that's important because the draft pick number that each team gets is set by taking your returning players and your tenders. Now each team has 10 tenders, and the breakdown of how those tenders work is in our other video. You take the returners and the tenders, which is 10, add those together, subtract that from 35. So if I have 10 returning players, 10 tenders, that equals 20. I subtract that from 35, I have 15 draft picks. So that means I'll pick 1 through 15. I'll pick each of the first respective 15 rounds. If I have more players on my team added to my draft picks, maybe I get less. So there'll be teams, because the returning number is so high, that literally will only get a few picks in the draft. So just doing a little quick analysis of the 2020 draft, there are 104 drafted players that played in at least one game. 58 players played in 30-plus games, only 19. Now, once again, 19 players played 50-plus games. A little bit of more information on this. This is taking a look at the last 3 years of draft picks, adding them up and averaging them by age, by how many years of eligibility they have left, and then weighting that ranking so it gives you an idea of what percentage falls into each category. In other words, if I have 1 year left, 22% of the time in the last 3 years, the teams draft players with 1 year left. 36% of the time they draft players with 2 years left, and 3 years left is at 32%. So you can see the majority, the vast majority, almost virtually all the players are older players. 3 years of eligibility, 2 years of eligibility, and 1 year. That means these are 18, 19, and 20-year-olds that are being drafted. Okay, the North American Hockey League has a little brother-sister, the NA3HL. This is the Tier 3 component of the North American Hockey League's Tier 2 status. We're going to just cover the requirements, the reality, and the T3 comparison, Tier 3 comparison real quick. The requirements are every team inside the North American Hockey League drafts at least one NA3HL player, usually from their affiliate team. And because they're required to do that, you'll always see at least one draft pick that is picked by the North American Hockey League team respective to the NA3HL. The reality is it's still extremely hard. We'll get into some statistics on that in a second, and then let's take a look at some comparison numbers. But look at the 3HL first. In the 2021 season, in the whole season, you had 67 players with NA3HL experience. This isn't the draft. This is any NA3HL experience. 67 players with one game. Okay, now that looks pretty good. 67 players, you think, well, okay. In a league of 20-some-odd teams last year, I think it was 25 or 26 last year because we had some dormancy. But let's look at it a little bit deeper. Only 34 played in 10-plus games. So some of the affiliates may came up, got a chance, got a little taste, got a little cup of coffee in the North American Hockey League. It didn't work out, or they went back to their NA3HL team. 34 players played 10 plus games. Now, 19 players played 40 plus games. So to be a role player or a significant part of an NAHL program, your 40 plus games is minimal. I would say to be a productive player in the league, you're playing 40, 50, 60 games, depending on how many games in that year. Remember, this is pandemic era, so those numbers are skewed a little bit. But only 19 players, that's less than one player per roster, less than one player per roster with any 3HL experience. So keep that in mind when you're talking about progression, and if it's a good decision to move to the NA3HL versus U16, U18 hockey. The NA3HL is a great league, and it has a great production to the D3 level, but the NAHL, its significant numbers go to Division I hockey, and it's a very competitive league. Even the Division III players in the league are extremely high-level Division III players, usually heading to the top 4, top 5, top 6 programs in Division III hockey. Let's look at the other leagues, and these are players drafted versus the amount of players that played 40 games. USPHL Premier, 27 players drafted, 5 with 40 plus games. The the Eastern Hockey League, EHL, 18 players drafted, 2 players with 40 plus games. The NCDC, 74 players drafted, 23 made it, so a third there. Numbers are extremely low in the EHL and the Premier. U16, U18, especially U18, is still the largest drafted pool of players. What's interesting is the doubling of U16 players over the last 2 seasons. You've seen that number astronomically grow. I think the number of 16, 17 players in 2019 jumped up a little bit, but this last draft, the 2021 draft, that number was closer to 27 players. I believe it was 27 players that were drafted. So that number's been going up. The trend right now is away from Canadian players. But not Canadian leagues. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of Americans that are playing in Canada that still are coming to the North American Hockey League by tender and draft and by free agency, but less that are actually Canadians that are coming across the border. And the reason being is the border was a mess this year. The lockdown, the pandemic, there was a lot of issues there. A lot of leagues up there just never got off the ground the proper way. What that caused was that when this whole thing happened and the border slowed down or virtually stopped or literally stopped, is those players that were normal Canadian players that would filter down either by draft, by tender, by invite, by free agency, couldn't get across the border. So the Canadian level went way down. The league itself is less than 7% Canadian right now. We're not done with Canada or Canadian players, but the pandemic has definitely changed the outlook there. Some numbers to throw out at you: only 4 players were taken in the first round of this last draft, the 2021 draft. They came from 10 different leagues. Significant decrease in the amount of players drafted. The border, the BCHL concerns are major factors. Only 15 teams drafted a Canadian player. That's significant. That's half the league. Drafted. It used to be each team had 1, 2, 3. Just isn't happening right now. And remember, there's also a cost to Canadian players. If you draft or tender a player, or you take a player from a team in Canada, there's usually a cost involved, a fee involved with bringing that player over, and that number could be several $1,000s. That's about twice as much as a European player, and it's several $1,000s more than bringing a player in from a U18 team or the NA3HL or one of the American junior programs, prep hockey, or bringing them in from Minnesota hockey. Okay, which is more important? Is it the tender or the draft pick? Leave your comments to me below. Let me know what you think. I can tell you that this is the age-old discussion. The draft pick has a role, it has a place, and you can have a lot of rewards if you take risk. Risk meaning you can pick a kid from the USHL that you think has a so-so year, may not be invited back to his team, or might not make it past the beginning of the season. So you might draft him so he comes to you. That might be a risky pick, okay? You can pick somebody over in Europe, it might be a risky pick. You can pick a Canadian player, it might be a risky pick. Versus your tenders that are locked in. Let me know what you think. Also, take the time to like and follow us on our Facebook page. Take the time to go to our YouTube page, watch some of our other video content, like and subscribe and follow us there too. I'd sure appreciate it. I hope this was a very helpful video for you. And I'd like to see your comments coming in soon. Once again, Jeff Colson from Junior Hockey Advisor. Have a great day.